Hello, everybody. Wait for you all to roll on, and then we'll tell you a little bit about our show today. Skylar's first. She beat Jack to the punch. Jack says, when do you want to go live next week? Cynthia, will you work that out with Jack? Let's get a date. Want to meet you or see you via the Instagram Live. You've been such a great part of the show so far, so would love to have you on. Tim, Megan is on. Megan, how you doing? I owe you a letter, and I'm going to get it to you by tomorrow. DeMarcus is there. Kokano is there. Kano, who is our producer. And Neil Young, who is our musical guest today, courtesy of 92.3 The Fox here in El Paso. As you know, if you've watched this before, whatever is playing on the Fox is what you're listening to as this show starts out. I won't even ask you who the artist is today, because I don't want you all to embarrass yourselves by not being able to pick out Neil Young. We have Congresswoman Veronica Escobar joining us momentarily. This is a big get for the Beto Instagram In Your Basement live show. And we're looking forward to listening to her. And then there's a little question box down here. If you'll hit that, ask your question of the Congresswoman. She sits on the Judiciary Committee. She had an important role to play in the impeachment hearings and producing the evidence for the trial that took place in the Senate. She's also on the Defense Committee, the Armed Services Committee. And so you may have a question for her on either of those issues, or the coronavirus legislation that has come through Congress recently, or the coronavirus legislation that we anticipate coming forward. So looking forward to that. Our producer, Cynthia Cano, is telling me that Veronica is on. I got to figure out how to do a split screen on my iPad so I can read Cynthia's comments and still look at my notes. Great story to tell you about. And let me actually put a link in here if I can figure out the comments. Give me just a sec. All right. I'm now going to pin this sucker. Okay. There's a comment pinned right here down at the bottom. It is a link to Project PPE. As we all now know, PPE stands for personal protective equipment. These are the gloves, the visors, the face masks, the gowns that our frontline healthcare workers and food bank workers and first responders and folks in the grocery stores are wearing to protect themselves, and by extension, all of us. We know through a gross mismanagement of the resources of the wealthiest, most powerful country on the face of the planet that we don't have enough PPE for everyone who needs it right now. But instead of just being pissed off and frustrated about this, Project PPE is actually producing the equipment that those frontline workers need by employing displaced garment workers in Los Angeles, California, to make this stuff and then send it out all over the country. So Jacqueline, who was our guest on Monday and was telling us about PPE, and for whom all of us together raised about $5,000 to help them in their ability to help everyone else, I told her that our local food bank in El Paso had run out of face masks, or was soon going to run out of face masks. And so today in the mail comes this FedEx package from Jacqueline with face masks. We've got 200 face masks here that are going to go to those great volunteers and potentially the National Guardsmen and the Get Shift Done folks from the El Paso Community Foundation, all of whom are distributing food to our fellow El Pasoans at a time of record need. Probably have not seen lines this long for food since the Great Depression. So for most of us in our lifetimes, we've never seen anything like this. And so for Jacqueline in LA to send us in El Paso these face masks to help the volunteers distribute that food makes me feel really good, not just about Project PPE, but about this country. She exemplifies the absolute best in us. And if you want to help her help this country at this moment of need, there's a link right here. You can click on it and you can donate $5 or $25 or $100 or $5,000. Whatever your capacity, she's getting this personal protective equipment to frontline healthcare workers and those who are serving others in need, like at the food bank here in El Paso, all across the country. So encourage you to give to Project PPE. Link is right there at the bottom. other bit of good news that I want to share with you. I asked you all to contribute to the El Paso Food Bank called El Pasoans Fighting Hunger. We sent out a series of fundraising emails to our national list. I asked you all on this stream to donate. We have raised now more than $40,000 for the El Paso Food Bank. And those contributions are coming in from El Paso, from other parts of Texas, and from all over the United States of America. So thank you all for being so generous and helping us here in El Paso. I've told you that the lines to pick up food stretch more than 2 miles long every single day, and there's no decrease in the need. In fact, we just got some unemployment data today nationally. More than 17 million of our fellow Americans have filed jobless claims over the past 4 weeks. Just in the last week, 6.6 million of our fellow Americans. Texas reported 121,000 newly unemployed just for the last week. 121,000 just in Texas alone. And as you can imagine, by and large, those who are newly unemployed came from the food service industry, but also manufacturing, mining, agricultural, healthcare, which was kind of a surprise to me, and a number of other industries. Those folks who are no longer getting a paycheck, who are now waiting not days, but in some cases weeks to be able to successfully file for unemployment because the state agencies are overwhelmed, cannot make ends meet in their homes for themselves and for their families. And so they need our help right now. Again, underscoring the need to help our local food banks. If you can donate, if you can volunteer, please do so. If you need the food at those food banks, please avail yourselves of it. All of us are doing all that we can, at least all of us who are part of Powered by People in this effort represented on this live stream, doing all that we can to make sure that everyone who is hungry is able to get food, at least in this state, certainly here in El Paso. Last thing that I want to draw your attention to before I ask Veronica to join us, Texas State Rep John Rosenthal just had an interesting tweet thread that I retweeted. If you follow me on Twitter, you probably have seen it. But he's talking about how dangerous it is that we do not have sufficient testing here in Texas. It's another way that Governor Abbott has failed this state in the face of one of the greatest threats that we've ever stared down. So in Texas, 170 of our 254 counties have reported at least one positive test for COVID-19, but Texas is dead last in the country. So 50th out of 50 when it comes to testing for COVID-19 per capita. So Texas is administering 3,400 tests per million inhabitants. America as a whole is doing 7,000. New York is testing 20,000 per million. Louisiana, 18,000 per million. Massachusetts, Washington, D.C., Washington State, all testing at 12,000 per million. Texas, 3,400. Governor Abbott, you need to step up and make sure that everyone in this state gets tested. It is the only certain way we are going to control the spread of this pandemic and isolate those who have COVID-19, be able to trace their contacts so that we know who they may have infected and isolate them as well so that this does not spread, especially to the elderly and those who have underlying conditions in this state. And by extension, because we're connected to the rest of this country, to the other states of this union. Wanted to make sure that I brought that to your attention. All right, we're now going to bring on Veronica Escobar, our hometown hero here in El Paso, Texas, our representative in Congress, the 16th Congressional District in Texas. She's at the start of her second term representing this community and has already distinguished herself in service in Congress. She serves on the Judiciary Committee, which obviously has had a really important role to play over the last half a year when it comes to the impeachment proceedings around Donald Trump's invitation of foreign powers to involve themselves, not just in past elections, but in future elections. She serves on the Armed Services Committee. She was previously a county commissioner and a county judge here in El Paso. And you also may remember her from a couple of years back on Father's Day, when we first learned that the Trump administration, through what they termed a zero tolerance policy, were separating 100% of the asylum-seeking families apprehended on the US-Mexico border and taking those kids who'd been taken from their parents after they'd been placed in cages to a tent camp in the desert just outside of El Paso in a small community called Tornillo. She gathered hundreds of us and soon thousands to bear witness, to testify back to our fellow Americans just what was being done in our name. And I'd like to tell you that in large part due to her efforts and her leadership and the public attention that she drew to this issue, all of us were able to compel the Trump administration to change that policy, not to be as good as we want them to be. They're still creating completely inhumane situations for those who are desperate and vulnerable, who are seeking our help and shelter in this country. But she stopped some of the worst abuses. And so I love the way that she's a champion, not just for this community and not just for this country, but for the best of us as we treat our fellow human beings here on the US-Mexico border. So with that, I'm going to ask Congresswoman Veronica Escobar to join us right now. This is the music that Fox is playing for you, Veronica. Not totally appropriate, but... All right, Veronica, Congresswoman,
Hey,
how you doing?
I'm good. Good to be in your basement.
Where am I with you in your house?
It's my bedroom. So
Right on.
my little fireplace back there with some photos. You may even see some crazy cats running back and forth. I've warned other members of my family to not walk behind me in their underwear. So fingers crossed that doesn't happen.
Does that routinely happen?
The walking around in the underwear?
Yes.
Yeah. It's been known to happen.
At least they're wearing underwear, which is more than you can say for our family. Does the fireplace work?
No, I really want to get it to work. It's an interesting, so the house that we live on, we live in Central El Paso, as you know. The house is over 100 years old, and the fireplace upstairs here in the bedroom is right above the fireplace that is in our living room. And there was a fire in the 1920s in the fireplace, and so we just converted the downstairs fireplace into a gas fireplace last winter, and I'd really like to do that with this one because it's just too risky to burn a real fire in a a chimney that's so old.
Yep. I like some of the comments that are coming through. Folks have suggested that this be a pants optional broadcast because we're only seeing from the chest up. So who knows, right? Who knows at this moment? Thanks for taking some time. Go ahead.
I took my shoes off, so I'm barefoot, if that counts.
There you go. There you go. So you today just had a telephone town hall to address small business concerns from your constituents here in El Paso County. And I imagine we saw, I think last week, 13,000 unemployment filings here in El Paso. A lot of small businesses are shutting down, furloughing, or having to fire, let go of workers. What did you hear from your constituents on that call?
So this is our third telephone town hall meeting that we've had, and we do them, they're bilingual. So through modern technology, folks can hit *0 and they get simultaneous translation, and they're able to ask questions, they're able to listen in. And,
Veronica, I lost audio from you. Can you all hear her? Give me a heads up or a Veronica, you there? Oh no. Here, let's do this. I'm gonna sign you off and then sign you back in and see if that works, okay? We will not allow these audio difficulties to stop us. So I'm gonna see if I can bring Veronica back in. Okay, DeMarcus is saying we lost her. Somebody says she's on a Nokia phone, and that's why. Cynthia, what do you say? Cynthia is right on top of this. She says that we can't hear Veronica. Cynthia, our producer. Nori is telling you, Veronica, to move to a window so you can get a better, hey, I see Renee is on, I see DeMarcus, I see Dax. Good to see all of you. I'm looking for Veronica. I see Amy is on. Hey, Amy. Amy just did grocery shopping for our house and for her parents' house right now. So thank you, Amy, for going out and doing that. A reminder that there's a little question box here at the bottom of the screen. If you have a question for our Congresswoman, I'll get to your questions right away. I'll stop talking about our old houses and the fireplaces and whether or not people are wearing pants, and we'll get to the questions that are on your mind. Let me see if Veronica's back in. She is. Here we go. Got some music from the Fox.
Morning,
It's a commercial. Okay. Hey.
Hey, okay, is that better? I'm by a window now. I'm super bright. It looks like.
No, you look great. You look great. Okay, Veronica, hold on, because I'm going to just go straight to some questions. We have like a million questions queued up here. Okay, this is from our friend DeMarcus. Have alternative methods of instant disbursement been discussed to give those most in need? And I don't know how the hell to read the rest of the question, but I think you know where this question is going. We're hearing from so many people who have yet to get the aid that was passed 13 days ago, signed into law 13 days ago. What can be done to speed this up? Direct cash disbursements, direct deposit. What do we need to do?
So, you know, as you know, we appropriated the money and the administration has to administer it. And we appropriated it, as you mentioned, a week ago Friday. And it has been really frustrating. We've heard from a lot of folks who are wondering how they're going to get their money, when they're going to get their money. Next week, there will be a portal up for folks who didn't file an income tax so that they're able to log in and be able to apply for their funds. I believe it will also be one of those "Where's my money" portals. And so that will be good.
I didn't know that there were "Where's my money" portals in life. What about, we were talking to someone at the food bank who, sad story, Veronica, you know, the line of cars is about 2 miles long. This woman took a bus to where the food bank is in the lower valley, walked 40 minutes from the bus stop with her little hand cart to get the food in that cart. We asked if we could follow up with her by phone. She does not own a telephone. There's a pay phone, one of the last ones standing, not too far from her apartment that she can make phone calls out on. How is she going to apply for this aid? You may not have an answer to that. I don't know how that works.
Yeah, so if she gets Social Security, it's going to take a little bit longer. So let's say she did not file a 2018 or a 2019 income tax. And I will tell you, like the financial services staffers, all the budget writers, everybody was like racking their brains about how to most quickly get people their money. And the best idea that folks could come up with in such a quick turnaround was use the IRS and use Social Security. The IRS is going to be one of the quickest ways to funnel people to money if folks have filed income tax returns. If they have not, and if they're with Social Security, what we wanted was the Social Security folks, Medicaid folks, to be able to use what they have in their records to get folks that money. Now, here's the challenge. And this is of course an enormous challenge. What about people who've moved? And what if they don't have the internet? How are they going to be able to tell the government what their new address is and how they can get the check? This is where we really have an obligation to check in on our neighbors. If you have internet, I have an elderly neighbor. We call her, we check on her. I know she doesn't have internet. So when she needs stuff from the grocery store, we get it for her. We're going to make sure she's going to get access to her check. And we have to do it in a way where we're not physically coming into contact with one another. This is really tough. And I will tell you, we are still submitting ideas for the CARES 2 package, because we know, at least in the House, the Democrats know, we've got a lot more support that we have to give. So I'm happy to take any ideas that folks have on how to best deliver that money to people.
Look, I'm going to get to what the next iteration of the relief bill is going to be, or what the next phase of this is going to be in a second, but a lot of questions. I just posted one about the U.S.-Mexico border. So we want to hear from you, from your perspective. What do things look like on the U.S.-Mexico border now? Do you agree with the contention that many are making, which I agree with, that those who pose no violent threat to us should be released from ICE detention now, released to families or those who can provide for them in our communities, because holding them together in what are functionally prison cells is going to further spread coronavirus amongst that population and within our community? Tell us a little bit about what's happening at the border.
Yeah. So a couple things that are happening at the border. Number one, you know, we know that the federal government has really failed in innumerable ways to address this challenge and to face up to it in a way that met the need and the urgency of the situation. Mexico has also failed, and you know, I've been very disappointed in Mexico and in the AMLO administration, because they've been complicit with the Trump administration in agreeing to use MPP and agreeing to receiving lots of refugees and asylees. But they've also been complicit in putting their folks at harm's way by not acting urgently and not protecting their people with, you know, under this coronavirus threat. They're our neighbor. And so we face that healthcare threat with a neighbor that for a long time didn't take this pandemic as seriously as they should have. Now, with regard to the human impact on migrants, one of the things that I've said to folks who've been critical of my view, because I signed on to a letter with a handful of other progressive Democrats saying, not only should you release detainees from ICE custody who pose absolutely no risk, whose only crime was that they crossed without documents, but many of whom have sponsors in the United States where they can go into those homes and engage in self-isolation and follow all of the CDC standards. And not only should we do that, but we should also be testing and releasing the folks in MPP, because they're asylum seekers in the American legal asylum system, but they're being forced to wait in a country that's been complicit in the Trump administration atrocities, tested and then released to convalesce and wait for their hearings and self-isolate with their families and sponsors.
Veronica, we need to get you by a window again. We're losing your signal. And for those who don't know, Veronica talked about
Are you hearing
MPP, which is the. I am now. You dropped out for just a little bit. We just need to get you close to a window. You know what? And now the signal's frozen from Veronica. She was talking about MPP, the Migrant Protection Protocols, which is this very Orwellian named program that keeps those who are legitimately seeking asylum, trying to follow our laws, in, if they're lucky, tent camps in Ciudad Juarez and Tijuana and Matamoros, but all too often literally on the streets there to fend for themselves against those who would kidnap them, prey upon them, rape them, kill them. All of those things have happened. And so Veronica was talking about our moral and, I would argue, constitutionally legal obligation to allow these people to apply for asylum. Doesn't mean that they will be granted it in every case, but right now we're not even following our own laws. Veronica, I've got you back. Can you not hear me? Oh man, this is one of those moments where I wish we both knew American Sign Language, and everyone who was following this did as well. Veronica, I'm going to sign you off and bring you. Folks, I'm sorry for the technical difficulties, but thank you for bearing with us. Mark, you're right. She can't hear me. Let me queue up a question. So we got the border questions. We got the ICE question. Galaxy's wondering if Veronica has a pet. She does. She has some cats. Maybe she can talk about that. Jack asked a very good question relevant to Veronica's signal. Has internet access been addressed by Congress? Let's ask this question that Jack has put up about a modern day WPA. Looking for Veronica. There she is. Let's see if we can get her back in. As you all know, Jack is not only a regular viewer, but one of the most consistent question askers, and typically the first person on, beat today by Skylar. Hey, I can hear you now. What do you think about a works progress administration reminiscent of the Roosevelt era? That's why we have Scenic Drive here in El Paso and the lake at Balmorhea, or the pond. What do you think about a public works program? Or is that part of the infrastructure bill that you're working on right now with your colleagues in Congress? Cynthia, you need to go fix Veronica's internet now. Oh no. Veronica, I have found sometimes when my internet is stuck, I take it off Wi-Fi and I get a decent cell signal. There, are you there? Someone says, it's not a live stream, it's an adventure.
Can you hear me? Are you able to hear me?
Veronica, we can see a still of you, and it's awesome, but it's not as good as seeing you in vivo. There you are. Oh, shit. So, Cynthia, as our producer of this show, from now on, you need to go do a line check at every guest's house. And then if they don't have a good connection, we'll do some satellite stuff. I'm going to see if I can get Veronica in one more time. Oh, there's some election security questions. I want to make sure we ask Veronica those. Would love to know what you all think about the election that just took place in Wisconsin for a Supreme Court seat. Their very cynical action taken by the current Wisconsin Supreme Court to force an election in the midst of a pandemic, the likes of which we have not seen in the last 102 years in this country, forcing voters to literally put their lives at risk in order to cast their ballot and decide the direction and course that their state, and by extension, our country, will take. What does that portend for voting rights and voting in the time of coronavirus as we go into the November general election? Okay, Veronica, let's get you back on. This is going to work. I know it. I feel it. Let's get some music going. All right. Yeah, it's short for Geneva says they're trying to kill Democrats in Wisconsin. Veronica!
I'm outside.
Yay!
We'll see if this works. I don't know. But yes, I want to answer that last question because the infrastructure project, or the infrastructure bill that we're working on, that is exactly the point. When we only need to look to history to see how we have dealt with crushing economic challenges. We've got a healthcare challenge on top of an economic challenge, but the best way to come out of a depression or any kind of really terrible economic strife is investment, government investment in jobs, putting people back to work. We know that we're going to have three phases in dealing with this crisis. The first phase is the emergency phase, which we are still in the middle of. There's got to be a second phase, which is like essentially like a stabilization phase. And then we need a recovery phase. That recovery phase, we know, can be successful if we make the investments we need to make. And we've had crumbling infrastructure in this country for decades. But it's not just literal, like physical infrastructure, like highways and roadways, but it's water infrastructure, wastewater infrastructure, it's broadband. And we can do things in a different way, recreate our infrastructure in a way that's far more sustainable, and in a way that creates a better future for everyone. Obviously it's going to take support from Republicans and the White House and the Senate. This is why elections are so important. That recovery phase is going to take a long time. But I can tell you, I think if we win the Senate, if we hold the House, if we win the White House, I think you will see ambitious reinvestment in this country and in people like never before.
Veronica, I'm getting a number of questions about election security and what it means to vote in the time of the coronavirus. We saw what just happened in Wisconsin. Democrats, and I wonder if you're among them, are calling for universal mail-in ballots. We have a runoff election happening here in Texas. Give us your thoughts on that. How do we meet the challenge of maintaining our elections and then keeping our physical distance from one another?
So we absolutely need a no excuses mail-in ballot system regardless. There's no reason why people should have to still wait in line to cast their ballots and determine their future. But this pandemic should show us, as you mentioned in Wisconsin, what happens when we refuse to do that. Well, the different can do it on their own, but we really believe in, and we programmed in the House bill for the CARES package, enough money to basically pay every state to fund mail-in ballots, no excuses ballots, in order to fund the infrastructure to get it done at the county by county level. Well, of course, the Republicans didn't like it. The White House didn't like it. They fought it. They did keep in $400 billion that would go to states, or maybe it was 400 million, sorry. But they made it, they of course put an obstacle in place, which is a 20% match. Well, having run county government, I know for a fact, especially in the face of this pandemic, local governments, their coffers are being run dry by having to be on the front lines of addressing the pandemic, funding their health departments, funding local testing, funding programs and services like Meals on Wheels, et cetera. We're sending money from the federal level, but they don't have money for the 20% match. So this is yet another example of even the money that we have given, there are obstacles put up by the Republicans. We intend in a CARES 2 package to put more money in and to keep pursuing the no excuses federally funded election security program. But here in Texas, we have to put pressure on who you were talking about earlier, our governor, Greg Abbott, who in so many ways has just failed this state. He's trying to walk a line to please special interests, to try to show in some ways he's doing just enough so that people get fooled into thinking that he's doing enough for us, but he's pleasing his special interests on the other side. He needs to be pressured by Texans to make this change happen here statewide.
Okay, we're going to do a lightning round because I know you've got to go soon, but I want to get some questions in. Chrissy Powell, I just posted her question. I don't know if you had a chance to see it. How about those college students who may not have been able to qualify for the stimulus but are hurting right now?
Yeah, so we're talking about the different things we want to put into the CARES 2 package. We had some robust ideas for CARES 1 that of course were stripped by the Republicans, not supported by the Republicans, but we're going to continue to push them. I have heard from college students who are about to graduate. Can you imagine being about to graduate? Not only are you unable to finish your last semester, you don't know where you're going to get your first job out of college, or students who have to break their leases in order to go home and convalesce with their families and self-isolate, and then they're being harmed by not getting deposit refunds, etc. There's a whole host of ways that we need to help college students. We're working on it for CARES 2.
Veronica, there's a question here. I'm scrolling through them. What's on your playlist right now?
Oh, I listen to the same stuff, like the anywhere from, like, you were talking about music, right?
Yeah, what other kind of playlist?
Oh, okay. Well,
I don't know. I don't know.
Yeah, we'll call a playlist. So, I listen to a lot of 80s music and a lot of like folk rock kind of stuff, like the Eagles. I don't listen to a whole lot of new stuff. I stick with what's known and what's loved.
I'm the same way. I'm so bad about picking up new stuff, even though I've got.
Oh, you're very good. Like you always, I remember you always had like new music that I had never heard of, like The Pulp or something, or Pulp, or I don't know. I don't remember. I remember you introduced me to a song that I really still like, but I don't know the name.
Veronica, this will be the last question. Someone asked, how did we meet and what have we worked on together?
So we met when Ray Caballero was running for mayor in 2001. So that was a long time ago, almost 20 years ago. And you have not changed, my friend. You're still tall, skinny, fit. Meanwhile, I'm about to need a walker at some point.
No.
But and what have we worked on together? Well, we worked, in local government. Like we did a lot of working on building a great community and holding ourselves and each other and the community accountable, wanting a community that was ambitious and that dreamed big and that held high hopes for people like you and me who left for school but really had a very special place in our heart for our beloved community. But we wanted it to be a place that could thrive for everyone. That was the best thing we worked on together, was El Paso.
As awful as this is, and unfortunately it is only going to get worse by every projection that we've seen in terms of the number of cases and the number of people who will die and the number of families who will be affected. And that's got to continue to be our primary focus. There's some small gift in the midst of this, in that we get to be in El Paso and be with our families. And I've got to think, given your travel schedule, and I know it from when I was in Congress, you have to catch a flight every single Monday or Tuesday from here to Dallas-Fort Worth, and from Dallas-Fort Worth to DC. You work all week, and then you jump another flight back from DC to Dallas-Fort Worth to El Paso. The fact that you actually get to be with your family, you get to be in El Paso, and we can see behind you, it's just beautiful out right now in El Paso. We're so glad to have you back, and this community is so proud of you. You haven't had time to read all the comments coming in, but folks are very supportive, very grateful for your leadership, not just on issues that are important to El Paso, but issues that are important to this country. So thank you for spending the time with us. Very gracious of you.
Yeah. And thank you so much, Beto. And I love you so much. And I'm so grateful for your leadership and everybody that you've brought together and all the hope and inspiration that you provide to so many people. You are a very, very special person, a very special gift to this country and this community. I agree with you. I think in this really terrible, tragic moment, we have to do a lot of, appreciating the small things, appreciating the special things, the things that we have failed to really kind of stop and appreciate before because of our busy lives. But I truly believe we also really need to reassess. We need to assess how we consume things, how we treat one another, the things that are important to us, the things that we've made priorities. And I'll just give you one quick example, and I don't mean to sound preachy at all.
You're good.
But, the Pope in an article said something that really was very profound for me. And he talked about how we treat our planet. And basically, maybe this is like Mother Earth striking back in some respects. And I'm totally paraphrasing, and I'm not doing it justice. But I would urge people to read that article. Liz Cheney on her Twitter a couple weeks back said something like, "Hey, China, how about you just stop eating bats?" And the irony of that is what we do in our country and the way we treat animals, the way we consume animals. As a vegetarian and as an aspiring vegan, we have to really look at what the root of this is, and the way that we do things and consume things in our own self-interest and in our own selfishness. And so as we pause and we try to take care of one another and reflect on the beauty of our families and our homes and how lucky we are, how incredibly lucky we are, let's also reflect on things that we do that cause deep harm to the planet, to animals, to creatures, to things around us. And I'm not saying, everybody has to be perfect, and I'm a deeply imperfect and deeply flawed person, but we all could stand to have a little self-reflection, myself included, and implement some change in our lives and in our worlds. And this is the moment to do it.
Amen. So well said, and not in the slightest preachy. I think that's the message that we all need to take to heart right now. How are we going to use this time, not only to stop the spread of the pandemic and help those who've been affected by it, but to improve our lives and learn some lessons from what is taking place right now. Veronica, all week we've been talking about how disproportionately impacted Black Americans are by coronavirus. We look at the underlying conditions that they disproportionately share when it comes to heart disease and diabetes, the lack of access to healthcare, the lack of access to healthcare insurance, the kinds of jobs that many of them are working right now that put them at the front lines of what is happening, and the daily weathering that so many go through as they're treated unjustly in their own country. And we're seeing the consequences of that laid bare. What are we going to learn from that, and what are we going to change going forward? And I think your advice, your admonition makes so much sense right now. And I hope that we all take it to heart and we come out of this in some way a better country, or at least aspire to be a better country. So grateful for you, and hope that you will come on and join us again. It was fun talking with you.
That'd be wonderful. Thanks so much. Bye.
Adios. Bye-bye. Just another wonderful human being. Love Veronica so much, and am so grateful for her leadership, the fact that she's sacrificed a good part of her life to serve this community in public office, now representing us in a way that we're all so proud of in Congress. And then answering this really deep question that we posed yesterday of Lisa Delantoni, and Veronica stepped up and answered, what's going to change in us personally, in us as a country, after the worst of this pandemic has passed? How will we be better? How will we be worse? She referenced the rampant consumerism that defines our economy and our culture. Will that change going forward? We talked yesterday about those who are on the front lines, who very often are not earning a living wage, stocking the shelves, ringing up our purchases so that we can feed ourselves. The nurses or frontline healthcare workers, or the custodians in the hospitals who are cleaning up after us, who are literally putting their lives at risk to go to work and to make sure that we're all okay, who they themselves are not earning a living wage, don't have enough to make ends meet in their own homes, may very well, in fact, be some of those that we see in the lines at the food bank, where Amy and I have volunteered and have seen people drive up in their scrubs after having just worked a dangerous job, having to wait hours in line to pick up food that they otherwise cannot afford. Can we be better than this? I know that we can. Will we be? And that's the question for all of us to answer. On that note, and before I tell you who we're going to have on tomorrow, there's a link right here pinned at the bottom, and that goes to Project PPE. This is a personal protective equipment that our government has not been able to manufacture or source or provide for the healthcare workers whose lives are on the line right now. Project PPE in Los Angeles, California, has been able to gather displaced garment workers, pay them a living wage to produce the PPE that is then shipped out to hospitals and clinics and frontline workers all over the country. If you support that effort and want to help them out, there's a link right here. Amy and I have donated. We would urge you to donate as well. And we're grateful to everyone who has. I think they've raised $5,000 just from this Instagram live show. So we're grateful for your generosity. All right, tomorrow, mañana, on our show, we're blessed to have yet another member of Congress. The scheduling just worked out this way. We didn't mean to have members of Congress back to back, but Ami Bera, who is a member of Congress from California, also happens to be a physician, a medical doctor, is going to share his perspective on how this country can most effectively combat the spread of coronavirus. And he's also here to answer your questions. He's another good friend with whom I was elected back in 2012. So he was my classmate in Congress and has outlasted me there, and now is a colleague of Veronica Escobar's that you just heard from. So tune in tomorrow to be able to listen to Ami Bera. And then in a last moment of Zen, this is our son, Henry. He's our 9-year-old in 3rd grade. This is in the midst of our distance learning / homeschooling today. He would have to read a poem or a passage in English or Spanish and then answer questions. And you can see him writing out the answers to his questions in the notebook. And I just love that smile that is somewhat mischievous on his face as he's writing out his lesson right there. That was a beautiful moment from my day, and I wanted to share that with you all. Okay, We will see you tomorrow. Thanks for joining us. Spread the word. Love you all. Be good to one another. And we'll see you tomorrow. Bye-bye.